Welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Rukhsana Rahman from the Department of Women's Studies, Guwahati University. I will be speaking on the theoretical construct of masculine and feminine. This masculine and feminine, why these attributes are associated with the biological construct of male and female, we are going to check in this module. While introducing the construction of masculine and feminine, it has been found that gender is a relational category and that differentiation is a relational process. Female cannot be understood without male, poor cannot be understood without rich, black not without white. Here too, other categories like class, ethnic origin, religion, age, disabilities, sexual orientation, and individual choices interact. This complex web of categories of difference has been called intersectionality. Using an intersectional concept of gender as a power relation in which masculine and femininities have shifting meanings rather than essential helps to analyze the durability and stability of unjust gender and social orders, including the use of violence by man against other men, women and children, without taking the connection between violence, quote unquote, and masculinity, quote unquote, as something natural or unchangeable. Militarized masculinity is a product of overemphasizing the idea of violence as a natural, quote unquote, part of masculinity. Violence can also be a significant resource for re-establishing male domination and identity in a situation of crisis and devaluation of traditional conceptions of masculinity. This kind of crisis can be provoked by an individual loss of autonomy. Reasserting masculine identities is also one potent explanation for the usually high level of domestic violence in post-war societies where demobilized and unemployed ex-combatants use violence in order to re-establish their position in the family and the household. In the masculine representations of war, scholars have pointed out that weaponry is often subconsciously phallic in nature, from spheres in early warfare to nuclear missiles now. The language surrounding nuclear weapons is heavily sexualized. Initially, it was about being bigger in terms of the size of both the weapon and the overall stockpile. Casual references to the Cold War pointed out by the USA and the USSR as the big daddies of the war with powerful arsenals at their disposal. Contemporary references to weaponry still have an undercurrent of sexual activity, with words like discharge, quote unquote, and muscle, quote unquote, being commonly used. Due to the historical prevalence of male combatants, it has become accepted that masculinity is aggressive and femininity is passive. This feeds into how the gendered aspects of the war system are further shaped, which in turn further informs how the nexus is seen. During war, women are often more readily positioned in non-combatant supporting roles as wives, cooks, doctors, and caregivers. Militarism and patriarchy are seen as mutually reinforcing the subordination of women and femininity and the valorization of man and masculinity. Masculinity defines man, and during conflict, they are called upon to protect dear women, quote unquote. The urge to use sexual violence as a weapon in a conflict zone is related to their aggression, physical strength, and natural role as protectors of females who are submissive nurturers and givers of life. Wartime sexual violence therefore serves a dual purpose as a demonstration of power by a group of men over the enemy man or women, which simultaneously serves to emasculate the males of the enemy group. Feminization is also applied to dissenting men from the same groups like objectors, deserters, or homosexual male. Hence, the construction of an aggressive male, quote unquote, produces the idea of a threatened passive femininity, quote unquote, that is in need of protection. Now let us discuss about the formation of gender identities. The debate about the extent of the impact of socialization on the formation of a person's gender identity and to what extent are certain characteristics inherent in a person is an ongoing one, with various theories advocating various positions. However, there is a general consensus that the first 3 years of a human being's life are the years when gender identity begins to concretize. Boys, evidence indicates, are affectionate when small but are socialized into becoming masculine, quote unquote, through the models they are encouraged to emulate and through the attitudes and environments that they are put into. Girls are similarly socialized with appropriate, quote unquote, toys like dolls and tea sets to play with, just as boys are the toys of machines and guns. The boys are trained to be assertive and independent, and girls are molded into being pliant and dependent human beings. Within this context, it will be worthwhile to examine closely the concepts of masculinity and femininity as they exist today. Thereby, we can understand how social construction of masculinity is dependent on the biological construction of male, and the social construction of femininity is dependent and influential on the biological construction of female. Now, let us conceptualize the concept of masculinity. Masculinity has been perceived in different ways during different times, periods, but decisiveness, integrity, and strength have been core qualities described in such varying sources as the Bhagavad Gita and the tales of Homer and the pronouncements of Confucius. Masculinity as the focus of academic analysis and interrogation is a relatively new but fast expanding area of inquiry. In the United States alone, more than 300 courses are running. The intersections with other disciplines such as anthropology, psychology and sociology and gender studies makes this a study both relevant and important. Ronald F. Levent describes masculinity as, I quote, avoidance of femininity, restricted emotions, sex disconnected from intimacy, pursuit of achievement and status, self-reliance, strength and aggression, and homophobia, unquote. By implication, women would be assumed to be weak and submissive, though scholars like Freud and Zhang believed that human beings were androgynous and were made up of both masculine and feminine characteristics. Since what constitutes masculinity has varied by time and place, and there are many versions of masculinity, it is necessary to examine the concept in its various manifestations. As a subject, the concept has come into the limelight from the year 1980s when women's studies acted as a trigger critiquing the role and relationship of man with the world of the home, which until then had remained exclusively the women's terrain. Man's role in the domestic sphere, their specific contributions to it, and the dynamics within the family became areas of analysis. The absence of any research and academic interrogation on the subject was conspicuously missing. It was an article of John Scott urging further explorations in this area that initiated studies in the area. It was also clear that any holistic understanding of the role of and the contributions of women had to be analyzed within the framework of the study of masculinities. Ironically, for all the claimed superiority and celebration of manhood, it does seem to rest on a rather fragile and precarious edifice and needs to be reinforced constantly. The military plays a crucial role in the construction and the reinforcement of masculine in man, since it defends quote unquote women, community or nation as the case might be. Competitions and games of skill have long been the avenues of establishing manhood. The gladiators of ancient times and the game of rugby in contemporary times are all a testimony at the subconscious level to cater to the need to make one's image of masculinity strong. However, studies indicate that pressures on men to maintain their image of being masculine lead to stress. The whole projection of virility and sexual prowess, the accumulation and possession of wealth, particularly given the consumerist nature of contemporary society, is directly connected to social status. The working to earn the macho image and maintain a masculine appearance is a stressful process and frequently leads to major health problems for men in those areas traditionally associated with women, such as eating disorders. The following are some of the factors that have contributed to the revisiting of the concept of masculinity as it had existed till now. The fluid composition of modern society has also resulted in the boundaries between the work of men and women become diffuse. The growth of technology has contributed to the requirement of physical strength becoming less important in those areas of work where it was a necessity and have allowed women to enter into the job market. The growth of gender studies or women's studies has questioned the bias of male dominance and sexism in patriarchal structures of society. These factors have created what is sometimes referred to as a crisis of masculinity and opened the debate on what exactly constitutes masculinity. Actually, the concept of masculinity has been a fluid one and continues to be a subject of debate and dissent. Resting on the edifice of patriarchy, the concept finds it difficult to come to terms with the fact that both women and men are equal to one another and the male of the species is not inherently superior. Now let us discuss about the theories which is related to the concept of femininity. The concept of femininity. Femininity, like masculinity, is also based on a gendered concept of identity. It is about perception and the ways of perceiving. Although characteristics differ substantially, there are certain features that are ascribed universally to women. These are a tendency towards being emotional, tender, sensitive, caring and nurturing, and empathetic. Besides being characterized by the qualities mentioned earlier, women are often seen as pliable and helpless, considered an attractive trait by some. Sexual passivity is frequently perceived as a feminine characteristic and is linked to objectification. On the contrary, sexual assertiveness is perceived as masculine. However, in the more evolved parts of the world, sexual assertion or passivity are personal choices made by individuals rather than general features. Besides this, women are globally defined by their appearance. What they ought to wear and what they ought to look like is dictated by individual cultural norms and practices. For example, in Muslim countries, women are expected to wear the hijab and observe parda, or women in India in conservative communities still observe ghungat. Different parts of the female body can be exposed or have to be covered, again according to varying cultures and their relatively arbitrary impositions. The sari as clothing exposes the midriff of women. However, exposure of the midriff is frowned upon in certain cultures. On the other hand, Indian women are not expected to expose their legs, which apparently is not an issue in the Western world. Physical beauty in women is overstretched since it facilitates marriage or results in popularity among peers and the opposite sex. Certain physical features such as long hair, large eyes, a clear complexion, and a narrow waist all come in the category of feminine. In ancient China, women with small feet were considered aristocratic, which resulted in the practice of feet binding, leading to the malformation of the legs and feet. Again, in parts of Africa, the practice of wearing rings around the neck to make it longer still persists. The pressure upon young women to have hourglass figure or be a size 0 causes a wide range of health problems like anorexia, etc. Even colors and accessories like the handbag or the purse have assumed gender identities. For example, the color pink is connected to girls and blue to boys, and certain types of shoes such as high-heeled shoes are perceived as feminine, although interestingly they are associated with men in France in the year 1700s. Thus, it is clear that the idea of femininity is constituted by an intricate web of meanings, and girls are socialized to be aware of what are the accepted ways of behaving and appearing in society. Connected traditionally with the idea of femininity are also certain professions where the elements of care and nurturing are important, such as teaching and nursing. Till recently, several occupations like typists, secretaries, housekeepers were primarily considered to belong to women. But women have now entered almost all professions, although the glass ceiling persists in many areas, especially in the corporate and business world. In the early 20s, the ideal woman was described by the well-respected author Virginia Woolf as the angel in the house. I quote, "She was intensely sympathetic. She was immensely charming. She was utterly unselfish. She excelled in the difficult arts of family life. She sacrificed herself daily. If there was chicken, she took the leg. If there was a draught, she sat in it. In short, she was so constituted that she never had a mind or a wish of her own, but preferred to sympathize always with the minds and wishes of others. Above all, I need to say it, she was pure. Her purity was supposed to be her chief beauty, her blushes, her great grace." In a more scathing statement, French philosopher Simone de Beauvoir wrote in the year 1949, I quote, "Man can think of himself without women. She cannot think of herself without man, and she is simply with man decrease, thus called the sex, quote unquote, by which is meant that she is sex, absolute sex, no less. She is defined and differentiated with reference to man, and not he with reference to her. She is the incidental, the inessential as opposed to the essential. He is the subject, he is the absolute, and she is the other." Unquote. The iconic American feminist Betty Friedan, in her seminal book, The Feminine Mystic, written in the year 1963, that is during the second wave feminist movement, had strongly rejected the construction of femininity as frail, dependent, and childlike, contending that such a cultural construct was responsible for the subjugation of women. She called for an alternate image, one more realistic, resilient, and tough, robust in its determination. American feminist scholar Judith Butler contends that repeated acts or performances by women and men create and reinforce their traditional categories of gender. Thus, reinforced through the daily acts of people, gender is being constantly created and defined. Regarding the image of women, many feminists feel that those elements that mark women specifically, such as the use of cosmetics and adornments, the styles of dressing that focus and allurement, etc., should not be negated. Rather, they should be celebrated as part of the feminine identity and culture and should continue to remain valid personal choices for those who make them. The idea of becoming more like men to establish their identity is neither welcome nor necessary. Although much water has flowed since the times of these writers, and women have crossed many barriers regarding professions and self-image, essentially the social paradigm for the ideal women in large part of the globe is oppressive and constraining even today. The discourse surrounding women and war is that women are by nature peaceful, while men are aggressive and prone to war. Men are the protectors, women are the protected. These are essentialist assumptions that women's peaceful natural disposition is because of their biology, given their childbearing capacity, and they need to be protected by men. In these gendered discourses, deviant women are characterized as the exception to clearly understood gender norms. Feminist security theory highlights women's wartime roles as victims, protesters, promoters, and participants. It calls for redefining security, quote unquote, in the light of gendered hierarchies and patriarchal structural violence. Masculinity is not a gender, it is the norm because gendered institutions, discourse, and research present themselves as gender neutral or gender equal, look for gender where gender is claimed as absent. A feminist perspective searches for a reality that is overlooked in the traditional approach of international relations. It helps to deconstruct the gender subordination that has been naturalized in discourses, behaviors, and cultural symbols. This gendered nature of war and peace takes into account the role of women peace workers, women warriors, wartime sexual violence, and militarized masculinities. Gender is embedded in international relations, and the feminist perspective challenges a binary vision about what is defined as feminine values, quote unquote, versus masculine values, quote unquote, the latter being used as a universal reference to which everything is compared and appreciated. It breaks down gender dichotomy and aims to deconstruct gendered social and political norms. It rejects stereotyped ways of thinking about war and peace by exposing myths of a masculinized war and a feminine peace. A gendered perspective represents peace building as a process of inclusion, the inclusion of diverse groups in a society, the powerful and powerless is important, especially those who have been victims of war, those who have been dispossessed, those who have been excluded from power, position, and access, those without a voice or capacity to influence or shape the many political, economic, and social forces that determine their choices in life, and finally, those who can lead efforts or contribute to economic reconstruction, community development, or meeting the needs of displaced people as societies transition from war to peace. What is needed is the creation of new discursive spaces and processes to effect substantive change in the way diplomacy is practiced. Thank you.